From the JAMA Network, this is JAMA Author Interviews. Conversations with authors exploring the latest clinical research, reviews, and opinion featured in JAMA.
Hello, I'm Dr. Christopher Muth, Deputy Editor at JAMA, and I'm here today with Dr. Sabrina Paganoni, who's an Associate Professor at Harvard Medical School and works as a physician scientist at the HEALEY Center for ALS at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. Today we'll be discussing 4 related original research articles being published in JAMA and the JAMA Network family of journals about amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS. The articles report the results of the first 4 regimens of the HEALEY ALS platform trial. 2 of these articles were published in JAMA, 1 in JAMA Neurology and 1 in JAMA Network Open. And as we'll discuss today, the studies are all closely related. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Paganoni, to discuss these interesting articles. To start with, can you please tell us about the platform trial design that was used? What is a platform trial in general, and why is this a potentially useful model for studying drugs in ALS?
Yes, so the platform trial is a large multi-center placebo-controlled trial, and the goal of the trial is to rapidly screen drugs for the treatment of ALS. Now, what's different about a platform trial compared to a traditional trial? A platform trial will allow the investigators to evaluate multiple treatments at the same time, and that's important because it means that we have more opportunities to find treatments faster using a shared infrastructure.
Okay, and in terms of the specifics, you have a certain number of sites participating, and then in terms of assigning patients to specific regimens, how does that work?
Whenever somebody is interested in joining the trial, the participant will be screened at one of the participating sites, and the participant will be assigned to any other regimens or drugs that are being tested in the platform at that time. And that type of assignment is now blinded, actually. Both the participant and the investigators will know which drug they could potentially be getting. However, there is a second level randomization where the participant is randomized to active or placebo in a blinded way within that regimen. What we do actually is then we have a small number of people on placebo per regimen, but then the placebo data from different regimens are shared so that we compare each active drug to the shared placebo group that comes from different regimens. And so the 4 papers describe the results of the first 4 regimens, which were launched at about the same time in 2020. And each drug, again, was compared to the shared placebo group that comes from the 4 different regimens.
Yes, and I think that's one of the appealing aspects of the platform trial, maybe particularly in ALS, but in other diseases as well, is that fewer patients need to be exposed to placebo because the placebo groups are pooled across the regimens, such that it may be appealing for patients who are thinking about participating in trials. They might be more likely to receive an active drug.
Yeah, that's true. So the platform approach has a lot of benefits, and I would argue for everyone involved. First and foremost, for the patients who will participate in the study, but also for researchers and companies. So let me just start by talking about the patients. That's very important, as you said, especially in a rare disease that's fatal and rapidly progressing like ALS. Reducing the number of people that are allocated to placebo as much as possible is definitely a big bonus of the platform approach. And so what happens here is that because we have this shared placebo group, we basically cut down the number of people who are assigned to placebo greatly. So it goes down from 1 out of 2 people taking placebo, if you think of a regular randomized trial where there is a 50-50 chance of being on active versus placebo. We go down to only 1 out of 4 people taking placebo, and that's really valuable for patients.
Yes, and there's other advantages as well. In terms of analyzing the trial, I'm thinking particularly, can you tell us about the outcome that was used for the trial? And it seems useful to use the same outcome across trials?
So first of all, there are advantages, again, across the board for patients, but also for companies and researchers. So in terms of the outcomes that you were referring to, the platform approach implies the use of innovative statistical models. And in particular, for this platform trial, we used an innovative Bayesian shared parameter model that provides an integrated estimate of function and survival. That's per regulatory guidance. And the primary outcome and the analysis is the same across all regimens. And then in addition to that, there's a number of other outcomes that are tested in each individual regimen. They may be adapted to the specific needs of a specific drug or regimen. But again, the overall infrastructure and the overall data collection, data analysis, and the statistical methods are the same across the entire infrastructure.
Very interesting. So it seems like there's some component of consistency across the studies, but then opportunities to have some flexibility in terms of which secondary outcomes or analyses.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And that's, I think, one of the interesting aspects of the platform approach. So on the one hand, you have centralized governance and uniform processes and a shared infrastructure that affords so many operational efficiencies. But there's also a lot of flexibility at the regimen level to analyze specific outcomes, such as, for example, specific biomarkers that are important based on the mechanism of action of a specific drug. And so there's also flexibility that makes this study very appropriate for a number of drugs that are in the pipeline.
Great. Okay, well, let's get into some of the specifics of the studies that were published in JAMA and the JAMA network. Can you tell us briefly what were the first 4 drugs that were studied in these first 4 regimens and what the top-line findings of these studies were?
Yes. So if you allow me, I would like to share a story of how initially we started and how we selected the first 4 drugs. So in 2019, 2020, and still today, there was and there still is a large pipeline of drugs in development for ALS. And for a rare disease, it's important that we prioritize drugs and we screen them as efficiently and as quickly as possible. So at the very beginning of the trial, to jumpstart the trial, we actually had a competition and we received proposals from about 30 companies from all over the world, companies that wanted to enter the platform trial. And at the time, there was an expert therapy evaluation committee that included a number of scientists and colleagues that evaluated these drugs based on clinical potential, mechanism of action, and the diversity of the approach. So we wanted to pick drugs that had different targets for the first group. The prize of this competition was that there was some incentives for companies in terms of cost-sharing model to get the platform trial up and running. And so the first 4 drugs had very different mechanisms of action. And I want to share that that's also important for us as we set up the platform trial to be useful, not just to test a finite number of drugs or only, a small group of drugs, but we really set this up as an optimal infrastructure to advance the field in ALS. And in ALS, we know that there are different mechanisms that are at play. And so we wanted to kind of test them one by one, if you will, with different compounds that could tell us more about the several biological processes that are thought to underlie ALS. And so specifically, the first 4 regimens or first 4 drugs that were tested and are published in the JAMA family, the very first one is Zilucoplan, which is a complement inhibitor. And so it works essentially on one of the aspects of neuroinflammation, which has been implicated as one of the possible drivers of disease progression in ALS. And interestingly, the drug actually was approved for the treatment of a different disease, myasthenia gravis. And then we wanted to test again if that same mechanism could be important in ALS. So that was the first drug. Now, the second drug also targeted neuroinflammation, that's Verdiperstat, and specifically targeted inflammation in activated microglia. The third drug, CNM-Au8, works on energy metabolism, energy production. And the fourth drug is acting on the sigma-1 receptor, which is implied in neurodegeneration. Again, different mechanisms, and it was important to bring them all under the same roof to begin to test all these different pathways in a systematic way. And I should say that after the first 4 drugs were tested, we have included another 3 drugs in the platform trial. And now we are nearing the end of some of these additional regimens, and we are getting ready to add more drugs into the platform in 2025. So again, it's a perpetual trial that has the goal of rapidly screening drugs that have different mechanisms of action for the purposes of obviously bringing new drugs forward as a possible treatment for ALS, but also learning more about the disease itself.
Yes, that's a really, I think, excellent summary of all of the thought processes that went into the design and development of the trials, and really a huge effort, I think, to accomplish that. So tell us now, what were the main findings of these first 4 studies?
Yeah, so the phase of development here is a phase 2 trial. Essentially, the goals of the platform trial, as is currently operating, is to provide clear and rapid go, no-go decisions to drug companies. And the primary analysis outcome for these studies, as I said earlier, is an integrated joint model of function and survival. And the study was designed to last, at the time, for these first 4 regimens, 24 weeks or about 6 months. And so in terms of the primary outcome, unfortunately, none of the first 4 regimens met the primary outcome. And so from that point of view, again, they missed the primary endpoint. The overall data that we accumulated and collected as part of each of these regimens also gave us additional insights. In fact, we do collect a variety of outcomes for each participant in every regimen. We do deep phenotyping, genotyping, a collection of a vast array of biomarkers. And so based on the totality of the data, in addition to the primary outcome, the sort of the go, no-go decision was a clear no for the first 2 regimens, regimen A that tested Zilucoplan and regimen B that tested Verdiperstat. Now, in terms of the other 2 regimens, regimen C that tested CNM-Au8 and regimen D that tested Pridopidine, the companies are now moving forward with designing and launching a phase 3 trial, because while they didn't meet the primary outcome, there were some interesting findings in some of the biomarkers or exploratory analysis. And so again, all of these obviously requires replication in a phase 3 trial. So again, the goal of the platform trial was to provide direction for each of these drugs and help decide whether they should move forward to the next phase of development.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. Although none of them were positive, showing clear benefit in ALS, they still accomplished their goal, particularly, as you mentioned, Zilucoplan. I think that study was actually able to be terminated for futility, which in a way is achieving the goal of reaching a quicker go or no-go decision.
Yeah, and if I can expand on that, from a certain point of view, the platform trial is simply a multi-center randomized placebo-controlled trial, but it does have some unique features that make it so attractive. Again, it's a platform trial where we can test multiple drugs at the same time and sequentially. It's a perpetual trial where we continue to learn about more drugs and more about the disease itself. In fact, after the first 4, we already completed testing of another 3, and we are launching more regimens. And it's adaptive. And that adaptive component is, in my opinion, what makes it super interesting. There's different adaptive features to it. One of them being the fact that we can drop arms or we can drop regimens if during the course of the investigation it becomes clear that they're not going to be effective. So we have periodic platform-wide futility analyses that are built into the protocol. And it was during one of these analyses that it became clear that Zilucoplan had a very low likelihood of efficacy for ALS. And so because of that, this particular regimen actually was stopped early. And this was, again, according to pre-specified futility analysis. And while obviously the result was disappointing, what's important to note here is that at the same time, it is a strength of the adaptive design, because by doing these study-wide, regular, and very well curated and systematically done analysis, we can actually reallocate resources to other regimens and stop the ones that are really unlikely to work. And in particular, we also obviously reduced the burden to study participants, to sites. We reduced the number of subsequent visits. In fact, I think we saved almost 300 trial visits and almost 15,000 doses of investigational products by doing this analysis. So again, I think it's important that we include some of these adaptive features into all our trials so that we can make the best use of resources.
And then I wanted to also just touch on, you mentioned that drug companies may be exploring phase 3 trials for Pridopidine and the CNM-Au8 study. And so I want to just touch a little bit on those findings, because there is some nuance there, I think. And I think it sort of also relates to the platform trial design. So in the Pridopidine study, there was a subgroup analysis that focused on the group with rapidly progressive disease. And of course, these subgroup analyses are hypothesis generating. but it sort of raised the question of, especially in ALS, which can be a heterogeneous disease, that the platform trial just is enrolling patients in a very broad spectrum of disease, I think. And so there may be the possibility of missing the detection of a real effect in a subgroup. And then the CNM-AU8 study, the drug that was studied was the gold nanocrystals. And I think in the discussion they mentioned that it may take up to 24 weeks for the drug to reach steady state or to reach a concentration that would be potentially efficacious. And so maybe the trial didn't run long enough to detect a potential effect in that study.
Yeah, there's a lot that we can learn from the platform approach. And again, I want to go back to the fact that this is a phase 2 trial whose primary goal is to screen drugs and provide go, no-go decisions. And in addition, obviously, for phase 2 trials, there are other goals, such as selecting the right dose to move forward if there is a go decision, collecting biomarker data that can help inform the design of the subsequent study, also inform the design of the next study by providing more insights into the target population and the required treatment duration, exactly as you said. So essentially, in the phase 2 kind of context, we want to learn as much as possible about the drugs and their behavior, and then that will help inform the next phase of development. So exactly for the Pridopidine regimen and the CNM-AU8 regimen, there were a lot of learnings, which was wonderful to see, so that can be basically shared with the companies, and they can then decide whether to bring them forward or not. So again, I think the platform approach provides that benefit for companies that they can get clear answers faster and very comprehensive assessment in this shared infrastructure that's now been up and running since 2020. So we have basically a well-oiled machine for companies to come in and rapidly screen their drug and get more information that they need before they move on to the next phase of testing.
I'm curious how you see platform trials in ALS fitting in with the rest of the clinical trial ecosystem for drug trials in ALS. Is there a way for both platform trials and other types of trials? Are they complementary?
Absolutely. I think they're definitely complementary. And so first of all, the reason we launched the platform trial is because there is a large pipeline of drugs in development in ALS. And again, mostly at the phase 2 stage where decisions have to be made and we need to prioritize the drugs that are most likely to move forward to be successful. And so we should move them forward. And so I think, the platform trial approach makes sense in diseases where there is this large pipeline and we want to prioritize products and make progress together for the benefit of the entire community. Obviously, there will always be the need of other studies, different study designs for specific reasons. So, for example, if there are drugs that are in need of very early safety studies or PK studies or first-in-human experience, they may need a phase 1 study before getting to the phase 2 stage. That's always going to be something that's probably going to be required for the field. And so for the right drug, that would be the right path forward. But then again, when they get to phase 2, the platform trial approach provides the field with an opportunity to be more efficient. Essentially, we want to benefit everyone. And as I said earlier, patients, companies, and the researchers, and that's where the platform approach makes sense. In fact, I will say that our statisticians did some calculations and looked at the experience in other areas of medicine, such as oncology or infectious diseases, where platform trials have been around longer than in the neurosciences. And we realized quickly that the platform trial would cut the drug development timelines in about half, would cut the costs by a third, and drastically reduce the need for placebo, as we discussed earlier. So this is savings across the board in terms of time, costs, and patient resources. Now, there are other platform trials that have since been started in other regions for ALS. And again, that's wonderful, right? We see how this approach has been really valued by patients and companies and sites with lots of interest. And it's wonderful to see that more platform trials are happening in the neurosciences, both for ALS and other groups. In fact, we have met with about 20 groups for the purposes of mentorship and kind of sharing our own experience. They saw that we were able to start the trial relatively quickly. And so we have been meeting with about 20 other groups. And we are so excited that some of those groups are actually now starting their own platform trials, which is wonderful.
Yes, that is wonderful. And I think we certainly look forward to future results from the HEALEY platform as well as those others. Is there anything else that you want to mention about these studies today or anything else to our listeners?
What I find most exciting as a researcher myself, in addition obviously to testing drugs, as academic researchers, we really want to help the field move forward in a collaborative way. And I think that the platform trial is doing exactly that. So, for example, we are just publishing now the first round of 4 drug trials. And with that set of publications, we are also retiring the placebo data from these first 4 regimens. So what that means is that the placebo data from the first group of 4 regimens will no longer be used for the analysis of the future regimens that we are launching now. And that makes it possible for us to deposit the data in a public repository, to deposit samples and share them with nonprofits and researchers around the world that have questions about, they want to answer some questions, some scientific questions about ALS. We collected something like 60,000 cryovials in terms of plasma, serum, urine, spinal fluid. We did genome sequencing from the majority of the participants. So we are sharing all of this because now, again, we are retiring the first 4 regimens and the placebo data will no longer be used for active comparisons. And so we can actually help the entire scientific community answer more important scientific questions. So, for example, basic science researchers will be able to request biosamples. People who are developing new outcome measures can mine the database that we have, looking at some of these innovative outcomes that we have embedded in the trial. And essentially, this placebo group that continues to grow with the new regimens and continue to be replenished by new regimens is essentially a natural history study and a great resource for the entire field, and that's embedded in the trial. And by doing so, we can essentially amplify the impact of participation. We know that for our patients, what they really want is to help not just themselves, but also help the field and help others with the same disease. And by sharing all of these data and samples, we can really amplify their impact, and we're very excited about that.
Well, thank you very much for joining me today, Dr. Paganoni.
Thank you.
I'm Dr. Christopher Muth, and I've been speaking with Dr. Sabrina Paganoni about 4 articles published across JAMA and the JAMA network. You can find a link to these articles in the episode's description. To follow this and other JAMA Network podcasts, please visit us online at jamanetworkaudio.com or search for JAMA Network wherever you get your podcasts. This episode was produced by Shelley Steffens at the JAMA Network. Thanks for listening.
This content is protected by copyright by the American Medical Association with all rights reserved, including those for text and data mining, AI training, and similar technologies.